It's such a pleasure to be here with everyone. Good evening. I'm so grateful. Thank you so much for inviting me, Canadian Voice of Women for Peace. I love visiting Canada. I went twice last year, yes, including going to Halifax. But now, thanks to the American response to COVID-19, I can't even go just north of New York State to Canada. But thank God for the technology, and I can see my comrades and friends. And I say that even to people I've never met before, because those of us who oppose imperialism and who in effect become dissidents in our country are all comrades, whether we've met or not. I love to talk about, have opportunities to talk about international solidarity. And I think that's especially important for Canadians and USians. I hate to say American because everybody in this hemisphere is an American, but at any rate. And it's funny because here in the United States, so many people have misapprehensions about Canada and think it's more progressive than it actually is. Our country is so backward, so reactionary, so retrograde that we sometimes give credit where it is not due. For example, we have the terrible for-profit healthcare system, and the COVID-19 death toll proves it, and the terrible response to the pandemic proves it. So Americans know that Canada has healthcare for all, and so we see it as some sort of nirvana, but it isn't. Canada is like other members of NATO and the G7 and the EU and that entire axis. Canada is a US vassal state and a partner, I'm gonna say a partner in crime. It's a puppet government without independence, and Prime Minister Trudeau or whomever your leaders are do whatever its patron to the south directs it to do. It was funny to me when Trudeau was caught on a hot mic. He didn't know his microphone was on, and he was in a conversation with Boris Johnson and Emmanuel Macron, and they were criticizing Trump. It was a bit like kids in high school talking about the other kid they didn't like who was outside of their clique. But it doesn't matter how he feels about him personally. When, I'll give you an example, when the US told Canada to arrest Meng Wanzhou, the daughter of Huawei's founder, they did just that. Instead of refusing the American request to arrest and extradite her to the US, the US made this spurious claim that Huawei violated US sanctions toward Iran, and they should have told the US no. But just the opposite happened. Canada said yes. China promptly retaliated and arrested 2 Canadians who are still in custody more than a year later. And Trudeau still defends the extradition effort, just like the puppet that he is. So these formations, NATO, the EU, the G7, are all, they're muscle. You know, we should stop giving these leaders and these governments any credit. They are gangsters to me. And as far as I'm concerned, they are the muscle for the big gangster, the US. They were never benevolent. And since the fall of the Soviet Union nearly 30 years ago, they have committed themselves more and more to following the dictates of the US, which is a hegemon. So as Tamara just said, NATO, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, was founded in 1949. It was said to be the counterpoint to the Soviet Union and its allies. But in the last 30 years, the former Warsaw Pact countries have all joined NATO. So what purpose does it serve? It was, as she said, the NATO countries which joined together to dismember the former Yugoslavia and break it up into smaller countries. It's NATO which led the attack on Libya in 2011 and destroyed a sovereign nation, and turned it into a hellscape for its Black and African population, and a slave state snatching up Africans attempting to migrate to Europe. And it's NATO that attempted to do the same thing in Syria, and now joins the US in punishing that country with sanctions that quite literally caused death from hunger and lack of medical care. I want to give a brief word about sanctions. You know, I don't know how many, perhaps I'm preaching to the choir here, but people seem to think that if a country, generally the US or its allies, sanction another country, that means the US, that country won't do business with that other nation. But the US demands that its targets be blockaded by the rest of the world too. If any nation seeks trade or financial transactions with targets such as Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, Syria, Iran, Zimbabwe, and more nations, they too face economic strangulation. So US sanctions are in fact international sanctions. And we know for a fact that 60,000 Venezuelans have died because their country cannot get access to perform financial transactions with the rest of the world. And Canada joins with the rest of NATO and the EU in these aggressions wholeheartedly. When the US told Canada that it was going to choose a new president for Venezuela, Canada went along and became a member of this phony group, the Lima Group, which takes a prominent position in undoing the will of the Venezuelan people and violating international law. Lima Group was founded in Lima, Peru, with the stated goal of resolving Venezuela's economic crisis. Of course, sanctions are the cause of all of Venezuela's crises, but these agreements and treaties are for show. And they are meant to give the impression that democracy is being served in these acts of war by other means. If anyone doubts that the Lima Group is phony, remember that they denied media accreditation to the Russian-based network Sputnik and Ecuadorian-based Telesur for a meeting held in Ottawa last year. I'm assuming you all know about the term the Five Eyes. Sounds like a horror movie. I guess it is. Referring to the intelligence agencies of the UK and its settler colonial offshoots. The UK, Canada, US, Australia, and New Zealand comprise the Five Eyes, and they work very closely together to maintain their control and over their allies as well. And of course, propaganda plays a big part in what they do. In July 2019, the UK and Canada sponsored a press freedom conference in London. And it's ironic, this was just a few months after they denied access to Sputnik and Telesur. And it also took place after the UK arrested Julian Assange, who at that time was sitting in a London prison while leaders made claims about press freedom. That year, 2019, I and others, the Black Alliance for Peace and other groups, joined a protest in Washington where the 50th anniversary of NATO was being commemorated. And a little about Black Alliance for Peace. We founded Black Alliance for Peace on April 4th, 2017, which is a very significant date. On April 4th, 1967, Martin Luther King gave the speech that should be the most famous. It was called Vietnam, A Time to Break the Silence. And in those remarks, he publicly broke with President Johnson on the issue of the Vietnam War. And this was huge. King clearly stated that justice and equity cannot coexist with militarism. 1 year later to the day he was assassinated, and it's clear to anybody paying attention that his words in 1967 led to his death in 1968. So I hope you'll take a look at the Black Alliance for Peace website. Thank you, Elle, for helping me out here. I'm challenged. That is our fact sheet on AFRICOM, the US Africa Command. Black Alliance for Peace, I'll just read our mission, seeks to recapture and redevelop the historic anti-war, anti-imperialist, and pro-peace positions of the radical Black movement. through educational activities, organizing, and movement support. Organizations and individuals in the alliance work to oppose both militarized domestic state repression and the policies of destabilization, subversion, and the permanent war agenda of the US state globally. Since our founding, BAP, I'm just going to say BAP instead of Black Alliance for Peace, has organized people here in the US and internationally. I hope you saw it, and if you didn't, find the time to watch our June 16th webinar, which was called Rise Up to Shut Down AFRICOM. June 16th is Soweto Day, the anniversary of the Soweto uprising, and we thought it was a perfect moment to gather an international group to talk about the need to rid the world of US imperialist influence, especially as it impacts African peoples all over the world. The US Africa Command, known as AFRICOM, is just the latest manifestation of US empire building. The US has divided up the world into what it calls areas of responsibility. There is a US NORTHCOM, a US SOUTHCOM, US PATCOM, US EUCOM, US CENTCOM, and AFRICOM, the last of which was founded in 2008 at the end of Bush's term. But it came into full realization during the Obama administration. Egypt is in US CENTCOM, but the rest of the continent is covered by AFRICOM, which is based in Germany. Only Eritrea, one African nation, is outside of AFRICOM influence. There are some 40 bases or facilities of various types in Africa, with the US and France being the countries that have the largest military presence. This means that these nations lack sovereignty, and people in these countries lack sovereignty. Even if they have elections, they don't really have democracy if their rulers are in cahoots with the United States. Our latest organizing campaign is No Compromise, No Retreat, Defeat the War Against Black African People in the US and abroad. And yes, that's a mouthful, but we thought it was important to express our political orientation as fully as we possibly could. And among our campaign demands are the closing of all US NATO foreign military bases. There are at least 800 of them around the world. We want to cut the military budget in half, end the 1033 Defense Department program, which gives surplus military equipment to local police departments, and the investigation of all fatal police encounters, and of course, shutting down AFRICOM. Our goals are to engage with Congress and other elected officials through our candidate pledge form, wherein candidates commit themselves to agreeing to our demands. And we can see the importance of this campaign through recent events in the US. Ever since George Floyd was killed by police on May 25th, a series of protests erupted around the country and throughout the world, the largest and most diverse going back decades. The combination of the COVID pandemic and the US response has resulted in the loss of life, 130,000 people, unemployment for more than 30 million people, and inadequate government support. Lately, we've seen the city of Portland, Oregon has been in the news as the Federal Department of Homeland Security sent its own police force, including the Border Patrol, to stop a rather small but enduring action in that city, which was focused on graffiti on a federal courthouse. But Trump has been itching to send federal cops into demonstrations, and this was his big moment. And it was at the very least unsettling to see people pulled off the street and held without charge, although as far as we know, these detentions have been brief so far. But it's important not to just focus on Trump, but on the system. Barack Obama gave legitimacy, if not legality, to these acts. He signed the annual NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, and in 2011, it included a provision allowing for the detention without charge of US citizens thought to be terrorists, even on American soil. So this gave his successor carte blanche to do the same thing. It's quite bipartisan, the imperialist effort and the police state effort. But Trump, we have to be careful with Trump because it's so easy to denounce him. But in 2016, during his campaign, he called NATO obsolete. Now, no one knew what that meant. It didn't make him the peace candidate. He just meant that NATO nations needed to spend more money for their military. That's all. And they have done so, even, as I said, as they gripe behind Trump's back. So we can see that everything King said on April 4th, 1967 is true. We can't separate the domestic from the international. Governments that practice aggressions abroad will do so at home. But so millions of people were rightly outraged to see George Floyd killed, but 1,000 people are killed by the police every year. This week we've seen collusion, hot word in the US, between the two major parties, the military-industrial complex and domestic repression. A congressional vote failed that would have cut our enormous military budget by a mere 10%. Military spending in the US takes up 60% of our budget. But even the House of Representatives, which is controlled by Democrats who are supposedly in opposition to Trump, even they voted against this provision that would have cut the military budget in a tiny, tiny amount. The Senate rejected an effort to ban the use of military equipment on Americans. And they're very hypocritical. Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi condemned what she called Trump stormtroopers while also reauthorizing the Homeland Security budget without asking for any changes in how those people are deployed. The mayor of Chicago, also a Democrat, said she could work with these federal police forces in her city instead of opposing them. By the way, a couple of weeks ago, Trump told an interviewer, something's going to happen in Venezuela. I can't tell you what, but something's going to happen. So this declaration of war or additional sanctions, or once again claiming Maduro and his wife are drug dealers, another mercenary invasion attempt, we don't know because no one in the corporate media bothered to follow up. I only have a couple of minutes left. I want to talk briefly about some other Black Alliance for Peace police efforts. Black Alliance for Peace, we're not the Black Alliance for the Police, far from it. We have one of our groups in Baltimore has taken the lead in exposing something called Operation Relentless Pursuit, which is a Trump Justice Department program, which under the guise of fighting crime increases surveillance in cities like Baltimore, Detroit, and Memphis. So we're talking about drone surveillance, aerial surveillance, cameras, all under the guise of fighting crime, which will in fact allow anyone in those cities to be tracked. By the way, I want to talk briefly about Joe Biden. I have no idea who's going to win the election in November. I do not believe the polls which say he's so far ahead of Trump. We were told the same thing about Hillary Clinton. But yesterday he said that Trump was the first racist president of the United States. Now, this was particularly funny to me because I wrote a book about racism in the presidency. And I joked on social media that there have been 45 racist presidents. And no, I don't exclude Obama. There have been 45 racist presidents. And if Biden wins, he will be number 46. Because, as we said, the role that the United States has played around the world in its aggressions against the global South, its aggressions against anyone who dares to try to advocate for their own sovereignty, to advocate for democracy in their countries, is inherently white supremacist. And so, yes, every president has been a white supremacist, and whoever wins in November will be one too. We have to be in solidarity with other people. We can't do these things alone. We have to find committed groups of like-minded people and organize and struggle together. And sometimes you have to struggle amongst a group in order to get things done, but there's too much emphasis, I know in the US, too much emphasis on individual action and people, you know, going it alone. It's just the opposite. Any deed any accomplishments that's of any significance for good or ill is done in a group. So we have to learn to be in solidarity with each other. And that means to help each other, and it means to be honest with each other. All of those things are important in organizing, and not to miss the most basic thing, hard work and consistency. We all have lives, it's not easy. We all have things to do. We all have families, friendships, all kinds of things, day jobs, everything. But in this process, we have to be committed and find other people who are equally committed, and just keep pressing through, which can be scary, because you know, the state is not playing around. They have dropped the hammer on people who have, someone in New York vandalized during a demonstration, vandalized an already vandalized police car, and the feds are making them face years, possibly years in jail. Things can be tough. We are the ones who are censored. All this talk about, what is it, cancel culture. It's people on the left who get censored. We are the ones who are excluded. We are the ones that the media never talks to. We are the ones who are left to work together to try to educate the public, while the corporate media continue to be stenographers for the people in power. So I think I went off on a little tangent there at the end, but I hope that answered the question. First of all, how many people know that there is a Five Eyes? I think we have, you know, we do have an uphill struggle in teaching people about things, information that's quite deliberately kept from them. So I think in the case of an issue like that, let's start with the basics. Did you know there's such a thing as the Five Eyes? And they work together very closely. In Canada, in Australia, a man who's a parliamentarian in the New South Wales Parliament, because he likes China, he's been to China, he advocates for better relations with China, and this elected official, respected person, had his home raided, his computers taken, someone called the media so they could photograph this, just to make sure that everybody got the message that there's a rhetorical war on China, as some of them want to have hot war on China. And I am sure that the United States cooked that up. It is quite real, the way these intelligence agencies work together, the fact that Australia does not defend Julian Assange, their citizen, that they put their relationship with the US first, the fact that the US connived to overthrow an Australian prime minister in an allegedly democratic country. So we just have to start by speaking the truth. And that can be uncomfortable because a lot of people don't like to hear these things, but we have to forge ahead anyway. We have to acknowledge, first of all, there are limits to electoral politics. There's limits to what governments do. They're not set up to do the things that we here tonight want them to do. It's people power that we need. It's people power that brings about change, sustained activism and organizing. That's the hard reality. And I'm not telling you, you know, what to do or not do in your career plans, but people here talk about, for example, can we reform the Democratic Party? We can change them from within. They don't want to change. So if you're involved with them, it should be with the knowledge that that's the case. They don't want to change. Why should they reform when they think they're just fine? They don't care if they lose to Trump. They don't care if they lose seats to Republicans. They don't care. So I think we have to, and I think it's hard when you're always told you live in a democracy. It's a democracy, it's a democracy. And you are given the impression that you can make a system do what it does not want to do, what it is not intended to do. So we have to work for revolutionary change. That's a scary thought and a scary word, but that's where our energies must be spent.